I heard that Dustborn was the most woke game of all time, and that it failed to achieve triple digits in its number of concurrent players, peaking at 83 over on SteamDB. Well, after spending hours playing the least woke game that I know of, Kyle Rittenhouse's Turkey Shoot, I figured it'd only be fair to give this super woke game a chance. And as an aside, how many peak players do you think that Kyle Rittenhouse game had?
Hi, I'm Kyle Rittenhouse, and my life was ruined by the fake news media.
We'll answer that question in a future video. I went into this experience ready for unprecedented amounts of cringe. In fact, I was ready to just refund the game if I couldn't make it past the first hour or so, but much to my surprise, I became very motivated to see the game through to its end. There is definitely a lot to say about Dustborn, but my general impression is that I think a whole lot more people should be playing the game. I'm going to cover what I think the game got right, what I think it got wrong, and I'm going to address some of the claims that I've seen made about this game. Before we get too much further, I want to stop and thank all of our Patreon supporters and channel members who are being listed here right now. If you dig what we do and you've got even $1 a month to help us out, that can go a really long way for us. So, sincere thank you to all the people who support us, and let's talk about Dustborn. Now, for the sake of transparency, I think that it's important that you know a little bit about me, the reviewer here. I have been gaming since the mid-90s, but I took a really long break, pretty much going from the GameCube in 2005 or so to the Xbox One in 2017. And later I moved on and returned to PC gaming. These are some of my favorite games right here. You can pause if you want to take this all in. I'm neither a liberal or a conservative. I think that sort of us versus them mentality that's so prevalent right now is a total waste of time. But I also firmly believe that it's almost entirely inescapable. If you don't pick a side for yourself, people are still going to pick a side for you in their minds and treat you accordingly. When it comes to politics, I'm pretty ambivalent. I don't believe that any major Republican or Democrat really has my best interest in mind. And I think that in general, most politicians at a state or federal level are just trying to make a buck. I enjoy a lot of stuff that some people might deem, offensive. Like, for instance, I keep a framed photo of Andrew Dice Clay here in my office. I also don't believe that I need to identify with the politics or ideas being presented in a work of art in order to experience or even enjoy it. I've checked out and often appreciated a lot of books, movies, shows, and games that don't necessarily align with my politics, and I feel that experiencing something that comes from a different perspective than your own isn't at all a threat if your views are based on any sort of real convictions and principles. I'm saying all of this to give you some idea of where I'm coming from, because I haven't seen very much significant coverage of the game that doesn't seem to be capitalizing on some kind of culture war rage bait. To be totally blunt, I think that most of the people who are regularly super outspoken about the woke versus anti-woke stuff are either grifters or mentally ill. Or maybe they're just teenagers, I don't know. I think that we should stand up against oppression and injustice when we see it in our lives and in our communities, but a lot of people, especially people who spend a lot of time online, are seemingly always looking for a new issue or enemy to target. And I think that Dustborn became one of those targets the moment it was announced. As far as I can tell, the game was first teased on June 8th, 2020, with Red Thread Games stating that there would be an announcement on that coming Saturday, June 13th. That was the day of the 2020 Future Games Show, an online showcase which also premiered games like Signy, All Guns Blazing, and Serial Cleaners. Dustborn was announced during the showcase with a brief teaser trailer, and a little under a minute worth of gameplay clips, accompanied by a message from Ragnar Tornquist, the game's director. This teaser trailer gave a look at the game's art style and a brief preview of some of the characters. A collage of words filled the screen at the end, letting everyone know that this game would cover a large number of topics. While some viewers were excited by the prospect of a new game from Red Thread, the majority of reactions to the video were skeptical or very negative, with a fair amount of political posturing on display. Even though the video gave a very limited look at everyone, it was pretty clear to many that these characters were all gay as hell. Probably. I mean, going by this video alone, it's impossible to tell if they're all gay, but you'd probably feel confident in betting that they use preferred pronouns, which basically meant that this game would for sure be getting dunked on all over the internet. I'm kinda joking here, but the characters were clearly designed in a way that gave a lot of people the impression that diversity and inclusion were likely priorities for the team making Dustborn, placing it firmly on one side of the culture war, despite the fact that no actual political stances were directly expressed in the video. Viewers could only make assumptions based on what they saw, but the vast majority of commenters were already digging their heels in for battle against Dustborn, which they interpreted to be another product of the woke mind virus. While a small handful of people expressed an open mind toward the game, positive comments were really lacking. When the next trailer for Dustborn premiered at the 2023 Gamescom opening night show, the overall response was much the same. We actually streamed that event on our channel. I went back to watch our reaction, and we pretty much felt like Dustborn was a generic-looking game that we had little interest in. Having now actually completed the game, I feel like the advertising efforts have really fallen short when it comes to accurately communicating what the game is like, but we'll cover that topic more in depth a bit later. On March 21st of 2024, a release date trailer was published, which brought out a whole new round of antagonistic commenters. Any good faith that these developers had amassed over their decades in the industry seemed to have dried up almost entirely. The game's director, Ragnar Tornquist, was a leading force behind widely appreciated games like The Longest Journey and Dreamfall, and he's been active in the games industry since the mid-90s. The studio behind Dustborn, Red Thread Games, has been active since 2012, and their previous games have all been fairly well received. When Dustborn finally launched on August 20th, 2024, it, somewhat unsurprisingly, fell flat with gamers. As of the date of this writing, which is 10 days after launch, the game is sitting at 101 reviews on Steam, and a fair amount of those reviews are from trolls. If you look up Dustborn on YouTube, almost every single video is calling this game woke, crap, and gay. Maybe it's just my algorithm, but I've been researching this game for a week now, and I've seen only a small number of people stepping forward to actually praise the game. Because of how much backlash this game was receiving, I decided, on a whim, to try the game out for myself. I love checking out controversial games, and this one was definitely riling people up. I think that a lot of what people refer to as overly woke stuff in video games is often just a soulless corporate attempt to appear progressive. The actual practices and ethics of some of these companies are a far cry from the progressive messages they might include in their games. From everything I had been reading about it, I assumed that Dustborn was going to be an especially egregious example of this. But what I actually experienced was a surprisingly soulful and passionate story that was way more complex and brutal than I could have ever imagined. Dustborn is set in the year 2030 in an alternate timeline where the JFK assassination attempt instead wound up killing his wife, Jacqueline Kennedy. If you're not a history buff, you might know Jackie Kennedy from the Misfits song, Bullet, where she's compelled to eat Glenn Danzig's spooge. That might seem like a weird thing to mention, but Dustborn is about a punk rock band, so that's actually a very fitting thing to mention here. Also, Dustborn has its own fair share of dirty humor, so we'll just roll with it.
It's finger time.
Just stick it in.
Weird, but okay.
Anyway, JFK winds up marrying Marilyn Monroe, and he starts a program called Justice, which is basically intended to ensure that things like what happened to his wife don't ever happen in America again. He removed term limits and stayed in power until 1977. In the year 2000, an event occurred that divided the country. People around the nation have different names for it, calling it things like the noise or the broadcast, but essentially it was a sound that went out from the center of the country, and it caused people to become paranoid and aggressive. Neighbors turned against one another, states seceded, and the country was massively fractured. The broadcast also mutated a small percentage of the population. The details are complicated, and explaining it too much would get into massive spoiler territory, but basically, following the broadcast, some affected people could use their words to alter the perception of those around them, or to control and affect people's bodies in various ways by doing things like restricting their ability to speak or healing their wounds. People with these abilities are known in the game as anomals. Being an anomal has been outlawed, and while anomals are present in society, they do all they can to avoid detection. You play as Pax, the de facto leader of a small group of anomals tasked with stealing a package and then smuggling it across the country, all the while posing as a touring punk rock band called the Dustborn. That's the basic premise of the game, but it's much deeper than that. The touring band thing is really just a cover story, and it makes up a relatively small portion of the actual game. The real meat of the experience is in exploring this vision of a fractured America and navigating it with a complex group of individuals who all have very different perspectives on the situation at hand. You wind up gathering almost a dozen different party members and companions, and all of your party members have fleshed out backgrounds and personalities. You meet people from all over the country, and you really get a feel for how people live in this world. In my opinion, there's a strong story arc here, and the characters develop and change drastically over the course of their adventure. What starts out as a potentially lighthearted road trip becomes something much more dark, introspective, and violent, and I think that it can be fairly thought-provoking if you're willing to give the game time to tell you its story. Most criticism of the game is coming from people who have never actually played it, and at most, they may have seen a few curated clips of the gameplay presented by internet personalities who regularly cash in on controversy and outrage. It's one thing to say that a game is bad or cringe, but if you're going to go after something this hard, I think that it's important to be accurate and factual. As an exercise, let's look at this clip from the show Side Scrollers, starring Stuttering Craig, formerly of Game Attack and Screw Attack. This clip is a pretty good example of the sort of stuff that many people online have been saying about the game.
This game has been called the wokest game of all time.
Oh no.
And it was released and it was inspired, Mally, by the results of the 2016 presidential election.
Inspired by?
Yes, this was inspired
it's a video
by.
game?
I have read or watched every interview and piece of media that I can find about Dustborn, and I haven't noticed any evidence of anyone involved in the production stating that the game was inspired by the 2016 election. If I'm wrong about that, please leave a link to a source down in the comments and I'll leave a correction right here. Hey, it's Matt here from the future, speaking to my past self. I went back in one more time and found an interview that I missed with PSU.com from back in July of 2020. And there's a quote here. The idea behind Dustborn's setting and characters was also influenced by a series of political events that deeply affected us all, beginning in the summer of 2016 and continuing until, well, today. So that's not really the same thing as this game was inspired by the results of the 2016 election. There was a lot of stuff going on politically in 2016 around the US and around the world. So to say, it was the 2016 election, maybe that's a part of it for sure, but that wasn't the only political event, and I do feel like it is just a little bit of a misrepresentation of what they're saying. They're talking about The fact that there's been a turning political climate and they wanted to do something that was a statement on what's happening in the world right now and has been going on for the past, better part of the last decade. Anyway, back to the video.
But I wanted to show you some of the intense, wonderful gameplay that you can get from this. I'd like to pull up this situation, and you play as this black them lead character of a lead character here.
I know that he's using they them as a sort of insulting slang term for a certain type of person, but the game actually does tell you the pronouns of the characters, and Pax here, she uses she, her pronouns. Anyway, Craig goes on to say that he doesn't care that this character is a black they them, and that his real concern is the story.
And, like I said, I don't really care, at all. Like, whatever, that's fine. It's all about the story. But here is the story here. We'll analyze what's happening on the screen here for after we're done. But let's actually watch this play out. Here's 9 seconds of gameplay.
Okay. The fella you're with, a black kid, dresses like a writer. Does he know anything?
You are racist.
The fella you're with,
Oh, okay, I get it. What the fuck?
The big issue for me here is that the hosts are reacting to this without context. Saying that you care about the story and then critiquing the game when you have clearly not familiarized yourself with the story comes off as completely disingenuous to me. He could have easily said, I don't give a fuck about the story, this game looks stupid and we're gonna make fun of it. But instead, he pussyfoots around and acts like he's giving the game a fair shake. There are a bunch of clips and screenshots like this of the game circulating online, with a common complaint being that the characters are behaving in destructive, selfish, overly emotional, and generally unlikable ways. People are saying that this game, which they are assuming is all about tolerance, is actually being very intolerant. Creating a game where you can trigger or cancel your opponents comes off to many as if it were a parody of modern left-wing politics.
It almost, it really, it's like, how can it not? It has to be a parody, right? Like, is there a way to confirm that? Because it's actually really driving me crazy.
Well, yes, there is a way to confirm this. You can play the game and find out for yourself. Because they haven't played the game, what these people fail to realize is that Dustborn is very aware of how bad these characters look when doing things like bullying or canceling someone. At the core of the story is an introspective critique on the power of language and the different ways that we can choose to use it. The game explores how language can be used for creation or destruction, and characters have to reckon with that in a lot of different ways. Of course, you'd have to actually play the game in order to understand that, but as the numbers have been showing, the majority of people talking about Dustborn have not been playing it. I mentioned earlier that anomals like Pax received their abilities through the broadcast, an event that caused people to become paranoid, angry, and violent. Her abilities are directly linked to the lingering effects of that event, and the same thing applies to all of the other anomals in Pax's party. Pax's abilities especially are the product of an extremely destructive and negative event, and at the start of the game, she isn't really strong enough or emotionally mature enough to overcome that. The game's prologue identifies the main characters as a group of outcasts and criminals, frustrated with a political system that has failed them and many other people around the country. People who are criticizing the way these characters behave are missing the point that these are not well-adjusted individuals. The fact that this crew relies on negativity and manipulation to get by is a major theme of the story, and it's an issue that those characters are forced to come to terms with. Characters are given opportunities to learn and grow throughout the game, and depending on your choices, these characters can come to a deeper understanding about their place in the world, and the conclusions that these characters come to can be totally at odds with the conclusions that other characters come to. Despite what people may assume about Dustborn, the game doesn't really tell you how to feel about much of anything. Many of the characters do have what could be seen as a left-leaning political identity, but even within that, they have a lot of nuanced views, and they regularly disagree with one another. The game shows people reacting to its world in so many different ways, and all of these different positions are explored with some amount of depth throughout the game. Some people want to drop out of society and become self-sufficient loners. Some want to become bandits. Some people believe that the system can still work, while others believe that direct action is needed to completely dismantle the system. The game covers a wide range of topics, from large-scale social and political issues down to intimate interpersonal relations. Politics, religion, art, sex, war, the game takes a risk and allows players to explore all of these things. And for the most part, I think it really nails it. Getting into such heady topics feels like it could be fumbled so easily, but I found that each major character in the game was very well written. They have grounded backstories and realistic personalities. They have clearly illustrated motivations, desires, and fears, and when you hear them talking about heavy topics, it usually comes off sounding very natural. There were a few lines that stuck out to me as feeling a bit forced, but those were relatively rare, and they usually sounded like something that character would actually say, as if the character themselves was forcing it into the conversation more so than the writers. There were some other missteps for me in the writing, and I'll talk about those in the actual review portion of this video.
Okay, so you then have the option to go into a trigger mode here. Okay, so you press the triangle button to go in. Now, here's the thing. They seem super weird about race. Think we can capitalize on that anxiety, kid? So let's follow what's actually happening here. They are using race against the cops in this situation because they feel like they're uncomfortable about race. So they're literally playing the race card in this situation.
Proposing that just showing a person doing something negative or destructive in a video game is an endorsement of those actions is the same insincere bullshit that politicians and moral panic grifters have been pushing since the 90s. And it's disappointing to see that tactic being used by Stuttering Craig, who has been in the gaming space for decades and has a bachelor's degree in journalism. I know he's got to make a living, but I don't think he has to lie or be willfully ignorant when it comes to covering games like this. In my opinion, cherry-picking 9 seconds of a nearly 20-hour-long campaign and presenting it without proper context and then saying, "Oh, I really care about the story," is just weak. If you're going to put yourself out there as a commentator, I believe that you shouldn't rely on that sort of sensationalism to support your stances. Craig goes on to show more gameplay, stating several times that this is the opening scene of the game.
Not that that's not cringy enough.
Oh no.
It actually starts on the opening scene of the game. And I put this tweet out, and this credit goes to Cabrutus actually for posting this initially. So I just said, if you ever just wanted to just claw your eyes out and rip off your ears at the same time, I present you Dustborn.
Yep.
Now, here's the thing. I want to play this clip because this is the opening scene of the game.
He shows the characters performing a song at a security checkpoint, and everyone on the stream thinks that it's really cringe. Yeah, it is kind of cringe. Despite stating several times that this is the opening scene of the game, this actually takes place about 90 minutes into the story. On top of that, the whole joke here is that the Dustborn are not really a band, and it's revealed at the start of this scene that they haven't even rehearsed any songs yet and are improvising during this performance. The scene is supposed to make the characters look kinda awkward and unprepared. Craig and the crew go on to dissect the song's lyrics, expressing how they feel threatened by the song's message, and go so far as to suggest that maybe the game should be illegal.
How is this okay to publish? This sounds pretty illegal, I would think.
Like, actually, though, yeah.
Listen, can you settle down? They're trying to be tolerant here, ladies. All right.
Yeah, but like I'm genuinely curious. Like I know you can publish like any type of game on Steam and such, right? Like any type of indie game, but like how is it? What's the legality of this?
In the game, this song was written by Pax, who, as we've established, is a criminal and outcast who is fed up with the system. She's playing in a punk rock band. These types of lyrics are exactly what you'd expect from a character in this situation, and I can't really understand how anyone in the real world would take this fake video game song as an actual threat. Pax grew up under the jurisdiction of a fascist government organization, which has been found to be conducting secret illegal experiments on its own citizens. In the context of the game, it makes total sense for Pax to rebel against this. Pax is also writing from the perspective of someone who has to live in near constant fear of being discovered as an anomal. She's constantly at odds with a society that she can't ever really fully fit into for reasons that are entirely out of her control. Instead of taking a moment to familiarize herself with the source material and think about who or what this song is addressing, Blabs here almost immediately decides to victimize herself. This is crazy to me.
This is a pretty violent song, I gotta say. They want us dead.
Well, you know,
Yeah, I heard that line.
Yeah.
Yeah, it says we're right behind you. Your time has passed.
Yeah, they're gonna kill you.
Your kind won't last?
Yes.
What?
Your kind won't last.
I have a hard time accepting that anyone would be so eager to pull up a video like this without any actual research or context and just declare that it's a direct attack on themselves and their race. It's a fake song written about a fake government and a fake society, but these people have just assumed that it was written about themselves. Why would anyone choose to be a victim like that? Blabs then takes things a step further with this comment.
Here's the thing, though. Like, they're saying, you know, our kind won't last and all that. And then Keto says replacing the populace is just an alt-right conspiracy. Am I right? But they can't populate because they're all having sex with the same gender or, like, cutting off their genitals and stuff. So it's like, well, you guys won't last either. Just saying.
Yeah.
I don't want to spoil anything, but pregnancy, family, children, and the way things are passed down from one generation to the next are all major aspects of the game's story. She obviously doesn't know that because she hasn't played the game, but it's a red flag to me that she's so quick to make those kinds of statements. And again, I don't want to spoil anything, but the majority of characters in the game are presented as heterosexual. There are some queer characters, but the game isn't about being gay. Additionally, Craig and many others have noted that the song rhymes the words new porn with newborn, suggesting that it's some sort of sick pedophilic imagery. While I think the lyrics are goofy and kinda cringe, it's obvious that the song is using the term newborn to mean renewed, revitalized, or rebirthed in a metaphorical sense, and is not a reference to being a newly born child. I know that Craig and the rest of the people in this video were never going to like this game, but if their talking points are intentionally withholding context and presented alongside inaccurate information and so much self-victimizing, what are they really offering to the viewer? And perhaps more importantly, what do they have to lose by providing more context and giving accurate information? If you take out all of the things they got wrong in this segment, what are you even left with? To me, a video like this takes misinformation and uses it to suggest to its intended audience that they are under attack. This is a very old tactic used by all kinds of grifters throughout history, and it's also the sort of thing that the story in Dustborn is extremely critical of. I played through the game, and I know that if all you wanted to do was pick on it and make fun of it, there's a bunch of scenes that you could show without having to resort to exaggerating and self-victimizing.
Bitch attack.
The game was a target for politically and socially charged negativity right from the start, having been sparked just by showing a preview of the cast of characters. People have been complaining for a long time about games becoming too woke. People are frustrated by seeing identity politics and diversity crammed into their favorite franchises. Personally, I think it's very obvious when a company is pushing diversity purely for monetary reasons. They're attempting to appear more progressive than they actually are because they're hoping to tap into some target audience. I think it's a disservice that so many studios are more willing to reboot an old property just with a new race or gender swapped cast than they are to actually give diverse creators a chance to tell their own stories on their own terms. But that's not what's happening here in Dustborn. This is just a group of people who made the game that they wanted to make. And when some other people saw that this game focused on characters who look like this, the game was immediately trashed and insulted. Criticism is usually inevitable, and I think that's a good thing, but there's a difference between critiquing a game and just insulting it. And it's very bizarre to me that this game in particular has seen so much energy spent on trashing it. There was never a chance to judge the game on its own merits. People just saw this and decided that they would hate the game. Now, I can't assume what every commenter was thinking, but if just seeing this teaser can cause such widespread and volatile reactions in people, I think that really says something about those people, and maybe about the culture as a whole. Many people are on edge and feeling threatened and irritable, and it's ironic to me that Dustborn is a game about a nation that was fractured by a concentration of those same feelings. The game takes place in a country shaped by civil unrest, and at a certain level, it's about how different people deal with that situation. The game asks questions way more than it makes any definitive statements, but so many people are acting like this game is pushing some sort of dangerous agenda. Another widely shared criticism of the game is that it was government funded, or that the devs somehow scammed their way into receiving taxpayer money. Red Thread Games is an independent studio, and they've been receiving grants ever since they were first established back in 2012. Norway has something called the Norwegian Film Institute. It was established in the 1950s, and over time it was merged with the Norwegian Film Fund, Norwegian Film Development, and the Norwegian Film Commission to become one unified organization. It focuses on supporting and preserving film and other types of media in Norway. It is a government agency overseen by the Ministry of Culture. We don't have anything like that on a federal level in the United States, but plenty of other countries do offer funding for all sorts of arts. When it comes to gaming, grants like this allow for small studios to establish themselves and to continue to operate, creating some stability for people working in that industry. These grants aren't enough to fully fund a game like Dustborn, but they do help to move things along. The Norwegian Film Institute, or NFI, has awarded Red Thread Games grants for its previous projects, Dreamfall, Dreamfall Chapters, and Dragon. I've seen accusations that this game was awarded grants just because of its political stances and diversity. But Red Thread and the NFI are just interacting in the same way they have been for the past 12 years. Dustborn also received a grant from the European Commission, which is the executive arm of the EU. Again, this is an organization that funds a lot of different projects. According to their website, this current round of grants has been running since 2021 and will continue through 2027, with a total budget of 2.53 billion euros. When it comes to Dustborn, the 150,000 euros that they were awarded is just shy of 0.00006% of the total budget of the grant program. Do you think that anyone complaining about Dustborn receiving this grant can tell you anything about where the other 99.994% of that money is going to? Do you think they actually care about these grants at all? Or are they just clinging on to anything they can to tear down this particular game? We can really only speculate, but these grants have been around for decades, and this is the first time that I'm hearing any gamers complain about them. So, I've spent a long time now talking about how I feel like this game has been misrepresented, but in my opinion, the haters aren't the only ones to blame here. Since the release of Dustborn, the official websites and social media pages for Red Thread Games and the Dustborn publisher, Quantic Dream, have been surprisingly quiet. You might be asking yourself, Quantic Dream published Dustborn, but I thought that they didn't make games for, well, regardless of what David Cage may or may not have said, that quote came from court proceedings pertaining to a lawsuit claiming that Quantic Dream was a toxic work environment. That case was eventually thrown out, and Quantic Dream wound up winning a separate lawsuit which was filed against some of the media companies that had covered the various accusations made against their studio. Accusations and legal woes aside, I love Quantic Dream games, and I love the work of David Cage. The games are so over the top and absurd, and I just have a lot of fun with them. We have around 20 hours worth of Quantic Dream coverage on the channel, and we have plans for a lot more. Anyway, as I'm writing this, it's currently been 10 days since the game was launched, and its official website still has the 2020 teaser trailer and a message saying that the game is coming soon. The most recent posts on the official Red Thread Games Facebook page were made back on March 23rd of 2024, a full 5 months ago. They didn't make a post announcing that the game had been released. Over on the official Facebook page for Quantic Dream, they waited a full 10 days before making a post about the game being available. And before that, their most recent post about Dustborn was made on June 10th of 2024. Things have also been quiet over on the Red Thread Instagram, where some posts were made on launch day and then nothing else. Over on the Red Thread Games Twitter, the team made several posts on launch day and then didn't make any more posts until August 30th, when they made a public statement denouncing all of the hate that the game had been receiving. The Red Thread Twitter has the most followers out of any of their other accounts, and in the first 10 days after launching their game, they didn't make any posts about it. The game's director made a point to share plenty of posts about the game, including reviews as well as comments and praise from people who were enjoying the game. I understand that any posts made concerning Dustborn were bound to attract trolls, but it still strikes me as really odd that neither the developer or publisher made any effort to look past the trolls and directly interact with the people online who have been enjoying their game. I don't want to say that they abandoned Dustborn, but when the game has such a heavy focus on overcoming adversity and fighting for what you believe in, it's odd to see almost zero effort from these companies to stand up for themselves and proudly share their game, or to recognize and connect with all of the people who want to support them. In those first 10 days after launch, the only thing that Red Thread did share from a fan was this ad in which Melissa Croft, a self-proclaimed extreme makeup athlete, does a cosplay montage, appearing as several characters from the game. This is nice for someone, I guess, but as the singular piece of content shared to your biggest social media audience, it just feels weird, especially because it's an advertisement and not a fan of the game organically showing their love for these characters. To make matters worse, this post got the game's slogan wrong. It reads, "Embark on an intense adventure across the undivided states of America." The line is supposed to be divided states of America. That's one of the biggest parts of the game. As I was wrapping up research on this video, I discovered two interesting things about the online promotion efforts for Dustborn. First, all of the links that I clicked for the Dustborn official website led to that website that I showed earlier at wearedustborn.com. But when I searched for the game using Bing, because I've got to get my Bing points up, I found a second website at wearethedustborn.com. This website is way better and it has up-to-date information on the game, as well as a lot of background stuff and extra videos, comics. This is really good. Why did it take me a week to find this? It would have just taken a few minutes to redirect the old website to the new website, and I have to wonder why that didn't happen. Secondly, back in 2019, a Twitter profile was started where someone, who I'm assuming is or was associated with the development of the game, started posting in character as Sai, who is one of your main party members in Dustborn. There's a long break in posts between 2020 and 2023, and the account seems to have been abandoned. That's really disappointing to me. The game does so much world building, and extending that into a roleplay account like this has so much potential. I feel like it's safe to assume that there was some budget for advertising this game, especially because they showed a trailer at Gamescom opening night, which, according to Gamescom itself, costs over $127,000. There are interns who will run a Twitter account for free. Social media is huge for indie games, and a few retweets of reviews or posts made by fans of the game could do a lot to spread positivity and offer at least some semblance of resistance against the overwhelming number of negative posts made about the game. Rather than sharing positivity, it seems that Red Thread is choosing to just delete negative comments. They've turned off replies on Twitter, and they are no longer accepting members into their Discord after it was spammed with gore and faced other digital attacks. That's their prerogative, I get it. The haters and trolls are probably very difficult to deal with. But with Steam charts suggesting that the game is doing poorly in terms of sales, I don't understand why they wouldn't at least have made a launch day post on all of their social media accounts. The way they've handled this situation gives me the impression that whoever is calling the shots on this kind of buckled and collapsed in the face of adversity. I reached out to both Red Thread Games and Ragnar Tornquist directly to ask about this and several other things related to the game and its development. Unfortunately, I've yet to hear back from anyone. So that was a lot of information, and I've barely talked about the game itself, but now that I've got all that out of the way, I'd like to share my actual review of Dustborn. I've never played a Telltale game, but from what I've seen of them, Dustborn is somewhat similar to those games, both in mechanics and in presentation. It uses a cel-shaded style similar to the Telltale games, but this is one of the better looking cel-shaded games that I've played. The lighting and weather effects look great to me, and characters tend to have realistic and dynamic facial expressions and animations. Mechanically, it's got a lot in common with Quantic Dream developed titles like Beyond Two Souls or Heavy Rain. You will spend most of your time with the game talking to people, exploring environments, finding items, and solving light puzzles. In this aspect, the game is kind of a light RPG mixed with a traditional adventure game. Characters have a lot to say, not only to you, but to one another. If you choose to, you can really immerse yourself in these relationships. Dialogue between characters can occur anytime, and if you stop to listen in, you can learn a lot about them and where they came from, and that's information that can be helpful when interacting with them and making choices. The player is regularly faced with all kinds of decisions and dialogue options. Each of your core party members has 3 different roles that they can fall into depending on decisions made throughout the game. These roles shape their personalities and directly influence the story and how they'll interact with you and everyone else. At the end of most days, you'll set up camp, which gives you time to go around listening to and speaking with all of your party. For me, this was very reminiscent of setting up camp and spending time with my party members in Baldur's Gate 3. except that the fluidity of the conversation in Dustborn usually made things feel very natural and immersive. During any downtime, you can offer party members gifts in the form of different items you might find while exploring. Each item is unique and has relevance to the world of Dustborn. These gift items are some of the many subtle world-building devices that the game employs, and they all help to paint a more complete picture for the player. Each member of your party also has a special skill, and you can call on these skills to progress throughout the game. I'm replaying Killer 7 right now, and the way you call up different party members to perform different tasks like lockpicking or breaking down a barrier really reminded me of how you swap personalities to solve problems in Killer 7. It all feels like a twist on the classic adventure game formula, where you have an inventory of items that you try to use and combine while solving problems. Except in Dustborn, it's abilities instead of items. In general, movement is really smooth, and navigating menus and conversations feels intuitive. There are time-sensitive dialogue options that allow you to interrupt or interject, and you can also move around the camera during conversations, which I found to be really satisfying for some reason. The game also features beat-em-up style combat and a rhythm minigame. Personally, I think that Dustborn tries to be too many things at once. The story, world-building, decision-making, and dialogue are so much more refined than anything else in the game, which leads to the lesser parts like the combat and rhythm sections feeling especially lacking in comparison. Thankfully, the game gives you the option to cut down on the amount of combat encounters, and many of the rhythm game segments are entirely optional. I appreciate the freedom to choose how often I want to interact with these parts of the game, but the sort of non-committal nature of them makes them feel just kind of unnecessary. Combat is pretty standard stuff, and it's really easy to cheese attacks and sort of stun lock enemies. Striking an enemy builds up meters for your special attacks, which are either your vocal-based anomal abilities like Trigger, Push, Bully, Hoax, and so forth, or a special taunt move that has you complete a quick-time event in order to perform a long-distance strong attack on an enemy. You use a baseball bat that you can upgrade throughout the game, but the difficulty of the combat scales up in such a way that I never really felt the impact of these upgrades. Maybe that's because I chose to have less combat, maybe they toned the difficulty down for that choice. I'm not sure, but it just kind of felt the same all the way through, even with a fully upgraded bat. Some of your special attacks will allow you to tap a button to tag in an ally for a team-up combo move. There's also a dodge roll. Overall, the combat felt to me like it had a solid foundation, but was not fully realized. I think that the sound effects could have had a lot more impact, and things could have been balanced in such a way as to make the combat feel more vital. As it stands now, you can pretty much just repeatedly tap the attack button and then roll out of the way when necessary to win almost every encounter in the game. As for the rhythm minigame, it's pretty standard stuff. You have 4 buttons that you press in time with the music when prompted. It's a competent rhythm game, but it's been done a million times before, and it's not really all that complex or satisfying. Any challenge it could offer is totally optional, because every time that you're required to perform a song, you get to pick which song you want to play. Song choices are unlocked by writing new songs in between performances. You go up to your guitar, and if you're able to at that time, you can choose to write a song. You then go into a very slow, segmented version of the rhythm minigame. In one sense, this is cool. You can hear Pax figuring out the chords and lyrics in real time, and it's a totally accurate representation of what it can be like to write a song. I've been on tour playing my acoustic guitar in the back seat of a vehicle, hoping to come up with a new song to play later that night. However, in execution, this mostly feels too drawn out to me. You do one brief section, stop, do another, and repeat the process a total of 4 times. After that, you can select this new song at your next performance. The first time that you do this is mandatory because you've got to have at least one song in your repertoire to progress the story. Now, I haven't tested this, but I'd assume that if you never stop to write new music, then you can just play that same song every single time. Each new song that you write is more difficult to perform than the last one. I found the first song to be just way too easy, so I wanted to unlock more songs, but every time I did, I became very bored by the writing minigame. The imbalance there, forcing you to do a slow, simplified version of the song before actually getting to play the track, just makes the rhythm game aspect feel kinda clunky to me. That feeling was amplified by the fact that personally, I found the songs Pax was writing to be just too tame. I think it would have been much more exciting if this self-described punk band actually played music that resembled punk rock. There's pretty much no bite to any of these songs. I can appreciate that the game's composer, Simon Poole, wanted to go for a synth-driven sound, but I would have loved it if the Dustborn sounded more like the Screamers or early Devo. There's so many examples of great synth-based punk rock made by groups of weirdos and outcasts, but the songs in the game don't feel like they were written or performed by anyone who has ever actually experienced any degree of angst or rebellion. I'm saying this as someone who loves punk rock and has played in dozens of punk bands, so maybe I'm a bit biased. But I never felt like the songs matched the emotional depth or attitudes of the characters performing them. Aside from the songs performed by the band, I think that the rest of the music in Dustborn is really good, and it tends to successfully punctuate the ever-shifting moods of the game. But like I said, you can limit your combat encounters, and a lot of the music stuff is totally optional, meaning you can really focus on exploring the world of Dustborn. Still, I was pretty frustrated by these parts of the game. Dustborn will present you with some very difficult choices. Sometimes you're pushed to recall your own memory of events when making a choice. Your choices really do matter and can make a significant impact on your experience with the game. You can fight, you can kill, people in the game will die, and you will have to deal with the aftermath of that in some very realistic ways. They don't really go easy on you when it comes to making choices, and that level of urgency just doesn't at all apply to the combat or rhythm game sections. I think that instead of trying to create a rhythm minigame that can adequately scale up in difficulty over the course of an 18-hour campaign, they could have just made it entirely optional side content, and I feel the same way about the combat. In my opinion, those things just take away from the best parts of the game, and the sort of non-committal nature of how the game presents them to the player makes them feel very tacked on. I would not miss them at all if they were just removed from the game entirely, and knowing that I can't skip them makes me a lot less excited to try and go back and replay the game and make different decisions. There's also no chapter select, which games like this usually have, because you're gonna want to go back and try a different option and see how things might change. It's frustrating. It'd be great if there were some kind of chapter select added on a update patch later on down the line for Dustborn. More so than a lot of games I've played, Dustborn presents a very realistic and finely detailed world, but not everything in it is explained or even pointed out through exposition. There's a lot of environmental storytelling and subtle choices that really let you know what kind of place you're in. Fans of narrative-driven games with deep lore will likely have a lot of fun piecing together the big picture in Dustborn. The map that you use to plot out your journey reveals a lot about the country. California seceded from the Union and became a technocratic corporatocracy called Pacifica. In that region, there is a former tech company that evolved into a powerful religious cult called the Puritans, who are somewhat like Fallout's Brotherhood of Steel, feeling a certain entitlement to controlling technology and steering society. In a way, they also represent the singularity. The Puritans want to transcend humanity and become a perfect merger of flesh and data. A large part of the country is known as the American Republic, which is under the jurisdiction of an authoritarian force called Justice, the initiative started by JFK following the death of his wife. Justice seems to have taken over every level of law enforcement inside the Republic, from common security guards to elite military forces. Justice is also often at odds with the Puritans. The center of the country, the source of the broadcast, has become the Great Plains Exclusion Zone, an area full of extreme dust storms that is off limits to the general public. Texas has become Colombia, and it appears that Russians have moved in near Hawaii. A large border wall was constructed between the Republic and Canada has become a socialist state. Acadia is still intact and owned by France, and Nova Scotia exists as an alleged safe haven for anomals.
Did you notice that they changed the American flags too? They removed the 13 original colonies. 50 states is now just one giant state.
What was originally 50 states has been reduced to less than a dozen distinct areas, and you'll meet people from all over this map, with each one having different culture, customs, religion, priorities, and motivations. All throughout the game, you can see subtle things letting you know more about what life is like in that particular area. Things like a poster telling you that the legal age for buying tobacco is 16, as opposed to the real-world age requirement of 18 years. There are books, toys, statues, buildings, billboards, and all sorts of things used to illustrate the state of the country, and it all feels very real and very well thought out. The game also includes a mini-game that is one of the better Pong clones that I've played in a very long time. Beneath all of this grounded, more realistic world building, there's also a sort of science fiction element that makes itself known through the technology in the game, and also through a sort of metaphysical connection that Pax has to a world beyond her own. A lot of that aspect of the game reminded me of Remedy's Control, and the way that the FBC researches the paranatural and alternate dimensions. To avoid spoilers, I won't go into any of that in detail, but the way that these realistic and more fantastical elements of the story work so well together is a real testament to the strength of the game's writing. The characters have realistic reactions to unrealistic situations, and it allows the game to tell a very dynamic story. The amount of care put into creating both the characters and their environments really shows. While at first the characters may appear to be super exaggerated or stereotypical, you steadily get to know them and see them from different perspectives that allow these big archetypes to be explored with a lot more nuance than I expected. Even small details like seeing characters change their clothing throughout the journey really let me know more about who they are. Your main companions at the start of the game are Sai, Gnome, and Theo. Pax and Sai have been friends for years, while Pax and Gnome are friends who have also had this sort of on and off again relationship. Theo is a friend of a friend, brought in to help oversee the mission that the group takes on. Sai's anomal ability is her physical strength. She also has vitiligo, which spreads across her skin and hardens when she becomes flustered or nervous. Gnome has abilities similar to Pax. These abilities are called Vox, or vocals, and Gnome can use their Vox to basically convince people that whatever they are saying is true. Theo is not anomal, but he's an experienced agent associated with an anomal resistance group based in Nova Scotia. When you first meet everyone, Pax appears to be short-tempered and somewhat manipulative, and it's obvious that there is a lot of residual tension between her and Gnome. Gnome comes off as very arrogant, even when they don't mean to be. Sai comes off like a big baby, and to be honest, I never really liked this character, and because of that, I often fumbled my way through interactions with her, which clearly caused damage to her friendship with Pax. Theo is guarded and seemingly a bit uptight, which makes sense considering that he's a total newcomer to this group of friends who already have a lot going on between themselves. To me, the way that you learn more about these characters over time, and the way the connections between all of the characters evolve through your choices, is a really well executed part of the game. At the end of each chapter, you get a comic book style recap of events, and you can see what percentage of players made the same choices as you. Comparing stats in choice-based games like Quantum Break or Beyond Two Souls is one of my favorite features, and it was really nice to see it included in Dustborn. I've seen a lot of people online accuse this game of being anti-white, which is ridiculous. There are white characters on every side of the conflicts in this game, and no one is ganging up against the whites. The main conflict in the game is really between three distinct and diverse groups, those being the Anomals, the Puritans, and Justice. Most normal people in Dustborn just seem to be caught up in the mix, trying to live a normal life in a rapidly decaying society. But Dustborn doesn't really focus on those people. You spend the majority of your time in the underground and more obscure locations, mostly away from mainstream society. While I do have a lot of praise for the writing, there were a few low points for me. Sometimes I was forced to use my vocals on people, instead of being allowed to figure out a different way through a conversation or situation. This makes sense because Pax acknowledges that she often doesn't feel like she has any other skills to rely on, and she often feels bad about her actions. However, moment to moment, that wider perspective on things isn't always communicated or illustrated. I think I would have preferred if Pax more regularly resisted using her vocals, even in situations where it's inevitable for the player. Again, that does happen sometimes, but it's not totally consistent, and it feels like a mischaracterization at times. For me, the last few chapters of the game felt a bit rushed. Some new characters get introduced, and even though they're crucial to the story, we don't really get to know them. This kind of thing is standard in a lot of games. A character might enter the story just to progress the plot in one way or another, but it really sticks out here in Dustborn due to how well you get to know all of the other characters introduced before these late game additions. There's a lot of intense things that happen toward the end of the game. At a certain point, we start to see things progress more as a series of brief vignettes, rather than the more long-form scenarios that make up most of the game. This adds a strange, liminal feeling to everything that I do think accurately reflects what it's like to be facing the end of a long road trip. But certain events are so rushed that it wound up feeling just kind of messy to me. The game did also suffer some technical issues. Characters speak during combat, and it makes sense, they literally use their words while doing battle. But in my opinion, they talk way too much, and sentences are often cut off, repeated, or difficult to understand due to various interruptions and sound effects that occur in these combat scenarios. Thankfully, if this really bothers you, you can limit the amount of dialogue that plays during combat. But again, if we can just turn this off, did it really need to be in the game at all? During regular dialogue sections, the volume levels can be all over the place. It was usually balanced, but sometimes characters would just be super quiet for some reason, and it was really distracting when this would happen, especially during more emotionally intense scenes. There were also a few visual glitches that I experienced, but only a small handful. This is all stuff that players have different tolerance levels for, but for comparison, for viewers of this channel, I encountered way more bugs and issues in Alan Wake 2. I think that bugs are worth mentioning, but they won't necessarily ruin my impression of a game. As we've seen, the response to the cast of characters in this game was explosive. Red Thread appears to have really gone out of their way to make sure that this game is diverse. Every Anomal character is either an ethnic minority, queer, missing a limb, or any combination of those things. It would be really easy for the game to use this as a crutch, to make each character's thing their entire personality, but that really is not the case. Every main character has a surprising amount of depth. Just because one character is a Muslim or missing an arm, it doesn't mean that they have to talk about that all the time. The game presents people as real people who are not entirely obsessed with identity politics, which is the exact opposite of so many people who are bashing this game. Dustborn is not a perfect game, and I can't say that it's a must-play for all gamers, but it's still a pretty good game with a really good story, and I think it deserves a lot more respect than it has received so far. It's a bold choice to make something so potentially polarizing, but I'm almost surprised that more gamers I know haven't been playing it or talking about it. However, considering my own reaction to the trailers for this game, I can't blame people for passing it over. I understand that it can be very difficult to take a nearly 20-hour-long campaign and condense it into a trailer, but I really don't think that any of the trailers I saw for Dustborn really communicated anything that I wound up loving about the game. With its rich lore, the sense of danger, and the harsh consequences of your actions, this game has more in common with RPGs like Wasteland 2 or 3 than it does any kind of cozy game that you might associate Dustborn with when you first see the art style and the characters. There's even a Fallout-style montage at the end of the game where you get to see how all of the different story threads played out due to your decisions. I really am trying to avoid spoilers, but I will say that by the end of her journey, my version of Pax was completely transformed, and I can't really say that there was any sort of happy ending for her. There was a resolution to a degree, but much like in real life, things don't just stop. There is plenty of room for a sequel here, and I would be really thrilled to see the team at Red Thread Games continue to build on the world that they've established in Dustborn. Whether or not that will happen is still up in the air, but if this game doesn't find an audience, I don't think that there's going to be much of a future for these characters. A sponsored post from a makeup influencer is not accurately communicating the depth and intensity of this game. The final trailer for the game, the launch trailer published on August 20th, shows a lot of different scenarios and characters, but in my opinion, it doesn't give the crucial context that one would need to give any of these scenes any real impact or relevance for a first-time viewer. Hopefully, I've illustrated throughout this video that presenting scenes from a game like this without proper context is really doing the game a disservice. There are tons of ways that a developer can highlight different aspects of their game, but as I've shown, the official social media accounts attached to Dustborn really aren't doing that, and I'm not sure why. In the months immediately before the game launched, Quantic Dream did publish a handful of interviews and videos made with the cast that gave players a little bit more info about the world and the people within it. But I really think that those sorts of efforts need to continue at some level after the game is published. But this game has only been out for about 2 weeks, and while the trolls have been relentless, the majority of them are going to move on soon. There's still plenty of time for Dustborn to connect with a wider audience, but for that to happen, I think that people are going to have to experience the game for themselves, and they need to share those experiences. Hopefully, they can get other open-minded gamers interested in checking the game out. Maybe this video can help to make that happen. If you've stuck around this long and haven't yet played Dustborn, I would recommend trying their demo. Keep an open mind and know that the full game expands the story in a lot of unexpected ways. Lastly, out of my mild frustration with the game's soundtrack, I decided to record my own version of a Dustborn song, and I'll leave you with that. See ya!